Do you believe in Santa Claus? Okay, just let me apologize right off the get-go for a Cher reference at the very beginning of an episode of The Gracious Guest Show, but I couldn't help myself. This is Mike Creevy, host of The Gracious Guest Podcast, coming to you here from my Blue Yeti Nano microphone in my office, in my home, in a secretive, secure location that many of you do not know where it is. Anywho, I am so excited that you have tuned in today because we are getting close to Christmas, and I wanted to kind of explore something today that hits on a couple different themes that this program tends to kind of focus on. And if you're new to the program, or just if you've tuned in before but it hasn't been a while, just by way of reminder, this program really deals with wonder and awe and the numinous, as it's sometimes called, the transcendent. And, you know, it might sound vague and kind of, what is that? But one of the things that I believe most deeply is that God, precisely because he loves us and loves his creation, has specifically chosen to communicate the big, grandiose, big picture type things, the numinous, the wonderful, the beautiful, that which is full of awe, through sometimes very mundane, concrete kind of things. That there is no sort of divorce between the spiritual and the physical, but rather that all comes from the same God. So we shouldn't be surprised to see those realities that we can't see sort of hidden in plain sight, so to speak. And there's a Catholic phrase in the liturgy it's very ancient, the idea of, and actually for a while we were sort of, I think, kind of mistranslating it in English as seen and unseen. And we recently went back to the more accurate translation, really, which is rather visible and invisible. And you may not notice at first, but that there is a big difference between those two translations. Because seen and unseen could just have to deal with something I haven't seen yet, but it's hiding. So, for example, my iPod has been missing for like a week. So for a while, my iPod was unseen. And then, thanks to the intercession and help of St. Anthony, who's, by the way, 3 for 3 right now in recent memory of finding things, I was able to find it the other day. So my iPod went from being unseen to being seen. But that's very different from visible and invisible, because those words contain within them sort of a implied sense of possibility. In other words, something that is visible means it can be seen. You know, so it's, maybe I'm not seeing it right now. So my iPod is visible, even when it's unseen, if that makes sense. Right? Like, I mean, all I have to do is see it, and then it's visible. But visible and invisible, that's very different, right? Something that is invisible means it cannot be seen. You know, so we think of like the invisible man or some sort of invisible presence, the idea that there is a reality there, there's something there, there's someone there, but it's impossible for me to see them or see it, or at least to see it in any way that would be able to be described as seeing the kind of normal way. So we think of things that are invisible by their nature, like love, right? Love is invisible. I can't go, oh, yep, there's love over there. I left it on the chair, you know, or love, oh, I hung it up in the closet, right? So love is invisible, yet you see love all the time, right? You see love through acts of love that people do for you or that you do for someone else, right? It's not like you're just like making something up. I mean, you are participating in something very real when you participate in that unseen thing. So with some of this in mind, you know, and these are some themes that are kind of in the background in everything I ever do here, and actually kind of everything, the older I get, like everything I do all the time. I'm trying to be more open to and receptive of really the wonderful and the beautiful and the loving and the truth and all that kind of stuff, you know, however God wants to communicate it to me. And increasingly, I hope, less according to how I demand to see it or experiencing it, you know, because the real picture is so much bigger than anything I can even imagine, that if I'm kind of trying to dictate to God how I want him to show it to me, I'm going to cut myself off from a tremendous mystery, a tremendous adventure that I can't even begin to imagine. You know, so what I want to do today is because it's December, because we're in this getting close to the Christmas season here as we near the end of Advent, I wanted to just sort of share here, just briefly, a very famous sort of episode in the, certainly in the United States, and then really just kind of in literature, in newspaper editorials. It's a chapter in history that's very, very famous, and that is the "Yes, Virginia, There Is a Santa Claus" editorial. And to really kind of explore this, all I want to do today is basically just share the background on it. Many of us, or if not most of us, maybe all of us, have heard of this before, or you've heard this phrase, but you may not be aware of the background to it. So what I'd like to do is just sort of share with you the background a little bit, and then actually share with you the editorial itself. And it's very short. What has actually become the most reprinted editorial in English ever. So it's interesting that this obviously had a very big impact. It had a very, very big sort of meaning for a lot of people. And so what I ultimately want to kind of explore here is that with you, and just sort of share my thoughts, because for me it's kind of mixed. Mixed feelings, mixed reviews on this absolutely cherished and beloved editorial, and I'll kind of tell you why. But before I do that, let me just share, because this is certainly a family-friendly program. By the same token, there may or may not be certain things dealing with a certain jolly elf at Christmas time that certain listeners who may be having their children in earshot may want to hold off on them hearing some aspects of it. So that's all I'm going to say. So last chance to pause this or kind of get the kiddies somewhere out of earshot, because here I go. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay. There is no Santa Claus. Now, what I mean by that is the way he's mostly depicted, right? If we look at the idea of a jolly elf, there's a lot of different traditions on this. Some sort of magical figure who arrives every year, comes down your chimney, delivers Christmas presents, and then leaves, right? Well, he doesn't exist, okay? That's a fact. And we could get into that a little bit more later. I'm sorry, if you need to go sit down or go get a drink or something, now's a good time to just pause and do that. Now, that being said, though, there's a whole rich history, I'm not going to get into all the details of it, on who Santa is based on. He's based on a real 4th century bishop in modern-day Turkey. It was Greece at the time, the city of Myra, M-Y-R-A, St. Nicholas. And he's on the Catholic liturgical calendar. We celebrate his feast day every year on December 6th. We just had it last week at the time of this recording. He was a great bishop, a great witness to Christ in a very troubled time. There's lots of different traditions about him, giving gifts. I'm just giving the real kind of broad brushstroke version of it, but traveling around, giving gifts and carrying a cross. He wanted to take Jesus at his word. Take up your cross daily and follow me. So he would kind of carry around this big cross, and also to basically have childlike faith. To love children, to basically spurn not children trying to come and receive the gospel, as the apostles had in that episode in the gospel when they were trying to keep the kids away. And Jesus says, let the little ones come unto me, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. So that's, a very Christocentric, very Jesus-based kind of approach that obviously this bishop had in his ministry. So how in the world does that become Santa Claus? There's a whole big history of that. That's not what this show's about per se, but you want to think more of the Santa Claus of popular imagination when you hear this editorial. So what this is, let me just, I'm going to share a lot from the Wikipedia page on this because it gives a good background, and I have a link to it in the show notes for this episode, as well as a link to newseum.org, which also had a nice breakdown of it, and the text of the editorial itself. So that's what I'm pulling from here. So here's the background. Yes, Virginia, There Is a Santa Claus is a phrase from an editorial called Is There a Santa Claus? The editorial appeared in the September 21st, 1897 edition of the New York Sun and has since become part of popular Christmas folklore in the United States. It is the most popular and reprinted newspaper editorial in the English language. Again, so very important, sort of editorial here. So here's the background. This is interesting. Again, from Wikipedia's entry. In 1897, Dr. Philip O'Hanlon, a coroner's assistant on Manhattan's Upper West Side, was asked by his then 8-year-old daughter, Virginia O'Hanlon, whether Santa Claus really existed. O'Hanlon suggested she write to The Sun, a prominent New York City newspaper at the time, assuring her that, quote, "If you see it in the Sun, it's so," end quote. Now, right off the bat, talk about like kicking the can down the road. I mean, it's just, as a dad, I find this kind of funny because I can totally see myself doing this with Noelle. Like, "Hey, Dad, I have a question." It's like, I don't know, email somebody about it or look it up on Google. So, in so doing, Dr. O'Hanlon had unwittingly given one of the paper's editors, Francis Pharcellus Church, an opportunity to rise above the simple question and address the philosophical issues behind it. Church was a war correspondent during the American Civil War, a time that saw great suffering and a corresponding lack of hope and faith in much of society. Although the paper ran the editorial in the 7th place on the page, below even one of the newly invented chainless bicycle, an ad on the newly invented chainless bicycle, it was both noticed and well received by readers. According to an anecdote on the radio program The Rest of the Story, Church was a hardened cynic and an atheist who had little patience for superstitious beliefs, in his opinion, did not want to write the editorial, and refused to allow his name to be attached to the piece. So right off the bat, keep that in mind, tuck that away, because it's interesting to then, I mean, it raises a lot of questions about Church himself, and how sincere was he, or was he a seeker? It's just an interesting question. More than a century later, it is the most reprinted editorial, as I mentioned. In 1971, seeing Virginia's obituary in the New York Times, 4 friends formed a company called Elizabeth Press and published a children's book titled Yes, Virginia, that illustrated the editorial and included a brief history of the main characters. They made it into a movie, or a television show, rather. History Channel also made a special on this. There's a lot of cool details about different interactions that Virginia had as she grew up, and she would write to people and include a copy of the original letter and all that kind of stuff, and it really just became this very important thing for everybody. And so, let me just flip it here. There's different mentions here in the article about readings of the editorial every year. It's become a pretty entrenched Christmas tradition in a lot of circles. And then, in fact, it says near the end of the Wikipedia article that, yes, Virginia, there is a ... has become an idiomatic expression to insist that something is true. So, that's a little on the background, but what does the editorial actually say? And Virginia O'Hanlon, by the way, she died in 1971. She was, how old was she? 71 plus, one sec here, let me look. 71. So she was like 82 years old when she died. And so this is the editorial. What I want to do is share it with you in its entirety. It's only 1 page long. It's pretty brief. And then just, kind of highlight a few things. Just some food for thought. And, this will be relatively short episode. I'm going to wrap it up after that. So I'm probably going to keep it about a commute time as I usually try to do. So here we go. This is what Virginia wrote. She says, "Dear editor, I am 8 years old. Some of my little friends say there is no Santa Claus. Papa says if you see it in the sun, it's so. Please tell me the truth. Is there a Santa Claus?" Virginia O'Hanlon, 115 West 95th Street, New York City. And then Church writes, again, anonymously, with this editorial, "Virginia, your little friends are wrong. They have been affected by the skepticism of a skeptical age. They do not believe except they see. They think that nothing can be which is not comprehensible by their little minds. All minds, Virginia, whether they be men's or children's, are little. In this great universe of ours, man is a mere insect, an ant in his intellect as compared with the boundless world about him, as measured by the intelligence capable of grasping the whole of truth and knowledge. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. He exists as certainly as love and generosity and devotion exist, and you know that they abound and give to your life its highest beauty and joy. Alas, how dreary would be the world if there were no Santa Claus! It would be as dreary as if there were no Virginias. There would be no childlike faith then, no poetry, no romance to make tolerable this existence. We should have no enjoyment, except in sense and sight. The eternal light with which childhood fills the world would be extinguished. not to believe in Santa Claus, you might as well not believe in fairies. You might get your papa to hire men to watch in all the chimneys on Christmas Eve to catch Santa Claus, but even if they did not see Santa Claus coming down, what would that prove? Nobody sees Santa Claus, but that is no sign that there is no Santa Claus. The most real things in the world are those that neither children nor men can see. Did you ever see fairies dancing on the lawn? Of course not, but that's no proof that there are no other fairies there. Nobody can conceive or imagine all the wonders there are unseen and unseeable in the world. You may tear apart the baby's rattle and see what makes the noise inside, but there is a veil covering the unseen world which not the strongest man, nor even the united strength of all the strongest men that ever lived could tear apart. Only faith, fancy, poetry, love, romance can push aside that curtain and view and picture the supernal beauty and glory beyond. Is it all real? Ah, Virginia, in all this world there is nothing else real and abiding. No Santa Claus. Thank God he lives, and he lives forever. 1,000 years from now, Virginia, nay, 10 times 10,000 years from now, he will continue to make glad the heart of childhood. Maybe I should read audiobooks. Sometimes I do I think I have a good, like audible voice, Anyway, at least I try. So just taking it on the surface, that's great, right? I mean, you can maybe see why, I certainly do, see why this had such an impact, right? Especially in a skeptical age, following a time of great turmoil and war and division. You could say we are also in a time of great division and skepticism, and so I think this can resonate with us. A lot of the message of this, and I would say, I do have a few things I just want to point out that I would criticize or push back on, certainly a little bit, and I'll get to that in a second. But just again, at face value, right up front, it does not surprise me in the least that this editorial has had the impact that it's had. So what are my criticisms of it? Well, first of all, some of what I started with up front. Obviously, if I had written this editorial, it would not be remembered as it is to this day. So, Mr. Creevy, is there a Santa Claus? Well, Santa is based on a tradition, I understand how that went, and I would use more tact than that. And certainly as a dad, this is a question my wife and I are figuring out now. How do we want to broach the subject of Santa Claus? So, we are playing along with it, so to speak, with Noelle. And as she starts to be able to understand a little bit better, we want to try to find a way. We don't know yet what we're going to do entirely, but we want to find a way to sort of water the seeds of that wonder and awe and that hope and that belief in just the incredible, But at the same time, we want to be careful because, and this can happen, right? You kind of go over the top, really kind of building up a kid's sense of this specific magical character, and then all of a sudden one day you're like, oh yeah, it's just a game, Santa's not real. And if you don't do that delicately either, what's going to stop the kid from then thinking that's the way God is too, right? And there's plenty of adults, sadly, who believe that. Bill Maher and others, some of these famous atheists, oh, do you believe in God? No, and I don't believe in Santa Claus either. Ha ha ha, and everyone claps and applauds, and it's just this really arrogant, snooty kind of dismissal of something that's really important, and arguably the most important thing of all to most people, really, in history. The question of who God is, what's the meaning of life, So, I would just kind of point that out up front. Like, there isn't a word at all in the entire editorial about the fact that Santa Claus is actually based on a real, actual guy with a real, actual message, a really important message, maybe the most important message. How would St. Nicholas of Myra respond to this question, right? Is there a Santa Claus? Santa Claus is just sort of a derivative title for, Sancta, saint, and Klaus, like a shortened version of Nicholas, or there's different traditions with that as well, but it goes back to him always. It's Saint Nicholas, Bishop Nicholas, a heroic, dedicated witness to the saving power of Jesus Christ. Okay, that's what Santa Claus is about. That's what Christmas is about. That's why we have one of these statues of like Santa in the whole red suit and everything, but with his hat off and this just posture of absolute love and devotion, kneeling next to the cradle of baby Jesus. I really love that thing, and we have it prominently displayed in our house. So that's just kind of one thing I want to mention. Like there's, I'm not saying that maybe it would have made sense for him to do that, and his personality maybe not something that was on his radar, something that he was interested in. And by the way, on that note, again, Church's approach here, and what was his name again? His full name, I forgot it. I forgot his first name. That's what I was trying to find. There it is, Francis. Yeah, Francis Pharcellus Church. But Church's approach here, like I said, I wonder, listening to that, is he just completely speaking with forked tongue here? Like, is he being completely disingenuous, or is this something he's hoping? And I like that idea. Like, what if deep down, through whatever he had been through and all the horrors he saw in the Civil War, like, maybe holding on to some hope that maybe there's some truth to it, maybe there's something there, and that little spark of hope and faith maybe in him. That would be what I would hope and pray for, that was what was going on. But who knows? Now, just one other thing I want to kind of shift to here is just a couple parts near the end here that he says. I love this, near the beginning when he says, first of all, emphasizing, I think, some good things. First of all, the littleness of all of our minds. So this check, hopefully, on arrogance. And we see this so much in this sort of scientism of our day, right? Not science. Science is wonderful. Science seeks to understand God's creation ever more deeply. Great, do it. But scientism, where you basically turn scientific knowledge, or the scientific form of knowledge, which is only one form of knowledge, it's not the only one, you turn that into the only one. You turn that into God. You basically push it way beyond the scope of what it, by its own rules, is even capable, of trying to do. Because science cannot, and does not purport to actually set out to give the ultimate answers to the meaning of life. But that's how a lot of people treat it, right? So that's very dangerous, very foolish, the height of arrogance. And so this is, I think, a great thing here to point this out right off the bat. We are little. We are small. Now, I think he goes too far in saying, man is a mere insect. You're like, well, hold on. No. Because you don't want to downplay it to the point of forgetting about our unique dignity and value in God's eyes. So we are not just dirt. We're not just the product of some sort of, random evolution or something like that. The Catholic Church is very open to the possibility of evolutionary theory, and I tend to support a lot of it myself, as long as it's at the service of understanding, God using a certain process maybe to develop his creation. But there's no randomness, there's no just sheer natural selection. Like, that's very much out of line with the Catholic Church's beliefs. So bottom line, though, I just want to highlight this last kind of thing here as he moves from that idea of emphasizing the importance of childlike faith, of being open to wonder and awe and the unexpected, right? That's kind of, again, like why I love this, because this is what I do with this show a lot, trying to find these things and follow these threads. And I do like this thing he says about, you might as well not believe in fairies. Nobody sees Santa, but that's no sign that there is no Santa Claus. Did you ever see fairies dancing on the lawn? Of course not. But that's no proof that they are not there. Nobody can conceive or imagine all the wonders there are unseen and unseeable in the world. Notice he made that distinction, right? The wonders that are unseen, which, maybe we will see, right? Like the aurora borealis is a wonder, right? That you can see, but most of the time you don't. And you see it, and yeah, it's a purely natural phenomenon, but my gosh, how dare you use the word only or purely natural to somehow dismiss its wonder? What's not wonderful about nature, right? Nature's a miracle. A miracle, I love one of my apologist friends describes it this way, that one way you can define miracle is something that basically doesn't have nature, strictly speaking, for its explanation, or there's some explanation beyond nature for it. In other words, a supernatural explanation. But nature itself, the whole universe itself, does not have a strictly natural explanation for itself, because it came into being at a certain point from nothing. So nature is, in a sense, miraculous, that all of nature really is, right down to the, from the smallest, subatomic particle all the way up to the biggest star, the biggest, galaxies. So wonder is everywhere. And I love this idea that, you know, not being proof that something doesn't exist just because you can't see it. And then that next part about the rattle, you take the baby's rattle apart, you can figure out how it works, and you can look at all the parts, but that doesn't fully adequately explain what it is. And I've mentioned again, that this is like the third time on this program I brought this up, that wonderful passage in The Dawn Treader by C.S. Lewis, when the kids meet on this mysterious island, this like wizard almost type character who turns out to be sort of like a retired star in the sky. Like he's sort of in retirement, but he's in this form, and he's talking about that. And the one character says, in our world, stars are just big balls of like burning gas. And very wisely, the star says to him, my son, even in your world, that's not what a star is. It's just what it's made of. And that is such an important distinction. If you want to, you should go back and listen to my episode called Reductionism is Lame, for this very reason. When we reduce something to, quote, just its parts, and we think that that's a sufficient explanation or account for the sum total reality and meaning and worth of what something is, we're just fooling ourselves, So bottom line, I think this is a great editorial. I think there's a legitimate and important reason why it has endured for so long. I think that there's a lot of truth in it. I think it's very inspiring. And the message that is a call to all of us to just, get over ourselves a little bit, like get out of our own way. Let yourself believe. Let yourself hope a little bit. And, you might be let down. We all will be sometimes. You might have your hopes dashed from time to time. You might have something you really thought was wonderful and beautiful and filled with awe not work out or not give you the same feeling it used to, or those kinds of things. Don't worry about that. But, don't close yourself off to that capacity. Don't close yourself off to that capacity, because you basically cut yourself off ultimately from a genuine and full experience of your human nature. You're missing out on some of the most important stuff when you do that. So, a little food for thought for this Advent and Christmas season, and ultimately the greatest act of wonder, the greatest, most unbelievable, incredible thing that has ever happened has been the incarnation of God becoming one of us, of ultimately making what is most unseen, most unseeable, most perfect, most powerful and meaningful and good and true and beautiful, becoming flesh in a little crying, whining baby in a stall somewhere in the Middle East. It's incredible. It's just, the story is absolutely jaw-dropping if you let yourself see it as it really should be seen. So, thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode of the Gracious Guest Podcast, and please go give me a review if you would over on iTunes, Apple Podcast. If you go over there and do that, that really helps to kind of get the show spread. Tell your friends about it. There's all sorts of different kinds of topics and stuff that I go into on this episode. Something for everybody, I think. I really enjoy doing it. We have new episodes every 2 weeks. Also, go check out the website, thegraciousguest.org. We're for also bi-weekly blog posts of food for thought, some reflection, some little fun stories. I put a YouTube video up at least once a month as well over my YouTube channel. So I'm out there. Link up with me if you want on all these different platforms. Thanks so much for stopping by today, and have a very blessed Advent, very Merry Christmas, and don't forget to wonder. Take care.